Hi. Here talking about the Inspector General process, the Inspector General's office within the Department of Defense. This would include Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, and Space Command, Space Force. Generally speaking, the IG is the complaints office. It's where you would report wrongdoing, something you believe is in violation of a policy or directive. Now, I say policy because it may not be a directive that covers it. If it's against the law, of course, whether it's a directive or not. And by directive, I mean a Air Force instruction, an Army regulation, any type of Navy document, Marine Corps document, Coast Guard document, that type of thing. One that's directive in nature. Some that are not directive in nature, that they talk about should or can, those things could be reported as well if it doesn't meet the criteria of mission support. There's a number of examples that come to mind. One in particular was back in the day, and I mean a million years ago, the 80s. There was a policy that if a person was single versus married and with dependents, they could get shorter notice when it came to orders, and they could get a longer short tour. It was, I guess, thought at the time that there was justification to allow that, be it to give the married folks more, or the folks with dependents more, or to give the single folks or the folks with non-dependents and single less time. Either way, it wasn't fair. However, was in violation of a policy or directive? It was not. It was considered acceptable. Of course, being married or having dependents is not a protected class like race, color, religion, that type of thing, age. So it was not necessarily something that would be covered as a discriminatory process, discriminatory practice. Of course, within the DoD, as within any industry, some restrictions when it comes to those protected categories, those protected classes, may apply. There are certain jobs that, like in the military, that they do have age restrictions. It's authorized. So many times people say, well, that's a protected class. It may or may not be when it comes to employment. So that's something to look into. But again, looking at policy or directive, and a person wants to file a complaint. If they're a third party complainant, for example, it doesn't affect person one, the complainant, but they're aware of some wrongdoing. They know of someone who's been mistreated or someone that's, for whatever example, aren't being treated as they should be. Even a group of people are being mistreated. So it's important to keep that in mind, that as a third-party complainant, you can still file the complaint. In the Air Force, for example, contrary to the Army, in the Air Force example, in Air Force Instruction, AFI 90-301, it actually requires Air Force members, if they're aware of wrongdoing, to report it. Now, they don't have to report it to the IG. They can report it to their chain of command or the appropriate area or office, but they're to report it. So unless you are cherry picking and choosing those instructions that you're going to follow versus those that you are not, which of course is inappropriate. You're not allowed to do that. So it's important that you do file complaints when it comes to wherever the appropriate office is, to get them addressed. When it comes to filing complaints, whether you're a third party or whether it's directly affecting you, try to keep it as concise as you can. Have one of those theme statements in your description and write it all out. Something that people do quite often is they try to give a balanced feel, and they'll say, well, someone might think this or someone might think that, to justify the wrongdoing. Don't do that, okay? The Inspector General team member who's going to be looking at it is going to do that anyways. And let's not give the other side that ammo. As it is, approximately, I would say higher than 80% of the time, do the IG side with command. So you're not doing yourselves any favors when you say, oh, this is how command might be meaning it for it to be, or this is how it might be interpreted. However, I see it this way. Don't do that. Don't do that. Be your own advocate. If you're aware of something, then make sure that it's clear that you feel it's a violation of policy or directive. Because if you don't feel it is, you're wasting your time. You're wasting the IG time, because they're not gonna go with it. They're gonna say that according to your complaint, it's authorized. So they're going to do some basic research, but if your interpretation is that it's authorized, or that it might be authorized, or it's probably authorized, you get my meaning? It's important that you keep in mind that this is not a balanced review of something. This is your complaint of where you think this is inappropriate, to what degree you think it's inappropriate. If you have a reference, all the better. Army Regulation AR 20-1 is the Inspector General's guiding document when it comes to the Army. There are many examples in there of how to I don't want to say word what you're saying, but guidance when it comes to things to keep in mind. They also talk about references to other places. Looking at a complaint, let's say of capriciousness or arbitrary treatment, maltreatment, being treated inappropriately. The Air Force, in one of their appendixes to Air Force Instruction 90-301, which is the Air Force IG guidance, there's a great attachment, one of the appendices that talks about filing a complaint when it comes to arbitrariness and capriciousness. It's really good. So by all means, that's something to keep in mind, regardless what service you're in. If you're in the Navy and you want to file a complaint about being mistreated, that's definitely some way to do it. And what is mistreatment? Well, if you're being singled out, as I just mentioned, arbitrary and capricious, if you're being singled out and something's happening to you that's not happening to other folks, and it's inappropriate, it's negative, that would be maltreatment. Now, if you're being treated special or better than others, and you feel that's uncomfortable, you don't think it's fair or right, you can report that as well. But it's not an adverse action, right? But then again, there's lots of ifs. There's lots of it depends, as the IG folks will say quite often. One person's pleasure is another person's pain. Someone might appreciate getting orders to Hawaii. Others might say that pulls them away from family that are having a certain family crisis at the time, and getting those orders to Hawaii would be adverse. There's a position that someone might have, a job that someone might have, and the job placement in Hawaii is a lesser than position. The advancement might be in some place in the U.S. or someplace in another foreign country. That would be advancement. So by getting that orders to Hawaii could actually be detrimental to one's career. And again, it's important that if you feel it's inappropriate, that's one of the main criteria. That's the litmus test for adverse actions, is if you believe it's an adverse action to you. If it's not an adverse action to others, is not germane. Okay, it's whether it's an adverse action to the complainant or the third party complaint. One more thing about being a third party complainant is that you're not allowed to get that feedback. The old saying about praise in public and criticize in private. Well, that administrative action that's potentially being taken against the subject, against the subject of the complaint, you will not be aware of that. You're not authorized that. A complainant, many times, not a third party complainant, but just a straight complainant, they may not be aware of it either. They may just be aware that the appropriate adverse action was taken. That might be as far as they go. Even when they do a Freedom of Information Act request, that might be as far as they're authorized to see, excuse me. And again, if something was happening against you, you wouldn't necessarily, adverse action is being taken against you, be it a letter of reprimand, be it some other administrative adverse action being taken against you because you're the subject of an IG investigation and you were substantiated, the complaint was substantiated, you wouldn't want that information to be used against you either, criticized in private, right? Anyways, so filing a complaint, be as concise as you can. Don't worry about being balanced, as they say. The IG will do that for you, as well as the subject, right? They're going to come up with all their information. You're filing the complaint. You're not supposed to be, Mr. Fairness. I'm not saying in any way lie or embellish. No, that's in violation of guidance as well, directives. There's something that we used to call the liar's clause in the DoD, and it spans all the Department of Defense service components, that by misrepresenting the truth, that can be held against you. So by all means, you want to make sure that you believe you're right. Okay, it's not that you're wrong. You find out later that an instruction or a directive authorizes it. That's not misrepresenting the truth. That's your opinion that it was wrong. Then you find out later whether there's an Air Force instruction or an Army regulation that authorizes it. Again, that's okay. Your best bet's to do your own research ahead of time and check that out. But that would not be considered an untruthful statement. When it comes to filing a complaint too, try to be as timely as you can. The time varies from different IG service components. But if you can do it within 60 days, that should be the maximum distance that you go. Some will take it up to a year later, but think of it like this. The IG have a lot of complaints coming in, and sadly, they're looking for a way to dismiss that complaint. And if it's because it's a violation of policy or directive, that saves them. If it's not a violation of policy or directive, that saves them the time of going through it and determining whether there's no wrongdoing. However, if you believe it is a violation of a policy, if it is a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or a foreign nation's law, for example, by all means, use those references. If you have no references, you don't need to say there's no reference to this or that it's authorized but wrong. Just say that it's wrong. If there's a chance that the IG may agree with you, there's a much stronger chance than if you shoot yourself in the foot by saying it's not a violation of anything. It is authorized, however, it's wrong. You see what you've done wrong there? You've really taken a very busy person's job and made it very easy, because now they don't have to do the research. You've already done it for them. They will take a very light brush at those references to ensure that they're still viable. But by all means, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like I said, the IG sides with command more than 80% of the time. And I'm not saying that they're not balanced, but I'm saying that they're human. And as a process, as an office, they are balanced. I heard many years ago from an attorney, actually, that was an IG, and he said the litmus test for a good IG is everybody thinks that the IG is on the other person's side. So the subject thinks he's on the complainant side. The complainant thinks they're on the subject side. I've had other IGs that say, oh, no, everyone's going to like us. We're professionals. They're going to see that. If you dig deep enough and you're asking the tough questions, many of them will take that opinion that you're on the other person's side. And personally, I agree with that. I think that is, you're doing your job. You're getting deep enough. When we would do inspections, which was in years past, and in the Air Force, I should say, in years past, that was part of the IG process, is looking at concurrence with the directives that were in place, right? And they would have exercises, war games, as you will. And within those, they would be looking for violations of policy or directive. If somebody was doing something wrong, but there was no regulation against it, we would look at it and say, well, maybe that is something that needs to be put into a directive, that needs to be clarified. It's important that people are aware of this potential error, right, or omission. So that would be something that would go forward to be a possible change. Anyways, when it comes to filing a complaint as well, you're timely, you're to the point, you're not worried about being balanced per se. You want to get your complaint out there. Think of it like this. When the IG writes up their report, they're not looking to be balanced in their report. They've got an opinion, and that opinion is either substantiated or not substantiated. And then they're going to use that report to explain why they feel that way. They're not trying to show that life's confusing and that they picked 51%. That's all done behind the scenes. When the report's published, it's saying this is our finding and this is why. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, just saying it is what it is. When it comes to your filing a complaint, think of it in the same way. You're not showing that life's unbalanced, that life's confusing, and that this is your overall opinion. Give your opinion. If you have references, put those references in there and put what you think it should be right. What would be the right way to do it? If it applies, if it's just to comply with the policy or directive, then mention that. If you do have a reference and they're supposed to do X or Y or Z, then reference that and put that in there. Make sure your inspections, make sure that your references are timely. If they're older, that's okay, but have they been superseded by another document? And if so, is that new information in that new document? Another thing to keep in mind is documents change all the time, but that doesn't mean that everything in that old document needs to be tossed. For example, in the new edition of Air Force Instruction 90-301, they may take out that appendix that talks about maltreatment and reporting that. That doesn't mean that that appendix is wrong. It just means that the majority of the document of AFI 90-301 was changed, and that's why they republished it. So we've got a short document, we've got it concise, we've got our complaint outlined, we've got the references in there if they exist, or just statements of wrongdoing. And again, we talked about references can be next to anything: civilian law, military law, and violations of policy or directive within the other services. All the other services say X, and ours doesn't say anything. Ours meaning whatever your particular service component is. The last, in timeliness, the last part of a complaint is making it clear that how they can contact you. Don't make it required. Put everything in there. This idea of more information available upon request, they've got a set timeline. They meaning the IG office in general, and the IG investigator in particular. They have a set amount of time, and that's going to vary from person to person because they have their own workload, right? If they're working 10 complaints at once, trust me, you're going to get that amount of time that they have to do that. So if they've got X number of hours, at the most you're going to get is that 10%, right? So keep that in mind, that just because the complaint is yours, it doesn't mean it's going to get 90% of the person's time and everything else is going to get 10. Okay, they've got a boss too. And that's something to keep in mind. I've had IGs actually tell me that they don't go by 51%. They make it clearly 70, 75% or higher before they will substantiate. Why? Is that correct? No, it's not correct. It's not. But they're human. Do they make mistakes? They do. Is that inappropriate? It is. But does it happen? Yes. Another thought to keep in mind is filing your complaint with the DoD, Department of Defense. That's a good way to go because now there, for some reasons, and some reasons it's not. A good reason is it's going to get filtered down from them to the service component, from the service component's staff level position, and then down to the major command and down to the installation, if that's where the complaint is based upon. Could be you're complaining about something at your major command, right? Or your MACOM, as the Army would say. Or even at the air staff level that you believe something's wrong there. But let's say it's at your installation level. All those different IGs are going to take a look at it. Now, they all don't necessarily get to cancel it out. But if they see a glaring error and they say it can be canceled, they may step in there and do that. But if the DoD sends it to them, odds are they're going to say, well, if the DoD sent it to me, it's got to have some validity because they looked at it. And to a certain degree, they will look at it. But if it's service component specific, they will send it to that service component. Now, if you want to limit those reviews, you can get right with the IG at your local installation and file it there. They always say to file a complaint at the closest level, right? The lowest level. And that's definitely something to keep in mind. It'll be quicker that way. You'll save the time of it going through the entire food chain from DoD IG down. You'll save that time. However, when a complaint is received, regardless of the level below the DoD, when a complaint is received from the DoD, from the Department of Defense, IG, it does have a little extra weight. Now, does that mean that you're going to get some extra oversight or it's going to be leaning towards your side? No, it doesn't. It does mean that it's been given from somebody at a higher echelon, so it's going to get the attention it deserves. It's not going to get blown off. It's probably going to be done in a equally timely manner as it deserves. It's not going to be the one at the bottom of the shelf and stays there, because the DoD, they track those and they have a set amount of time. That time is extendable. And we've had service components that have gone for well over a year when it comes to the complaint. So by all means, keep that in mind. But it doesn't mean that if your complaint was filed locally, it's going to be done any quicker, right? If the big guys are being slow leaked, the odds of your being slow leaked at the base level are just as likely. So you filed your complaint and you filed it with the through the DoD, which filters down, or with your local IG. Your local IG, if they can find think of the IG as the office of last resort. If it's something that would be addressed to the chain of command, the IG are going to send it to that level of the chain of command above where the problem is. If the problem is your supervisor, they're going to send it to your squadron in the Air Force, for example, or to your company commander in the Army. It's important to keep in mind that you may save yourself a lot of time by going to the commander yourself. It's something that there is a stigma, I should say, about filing the NIG complaint. And the IG knows there's a stigma. They know it's there, but they're not trying to dissuade you. They will ask, if you go in to see them to file your complaint, they will ask, have you checked with your chain of command? Okay, and they'll say it in such a way that it can be a little pressure. It can feel like a little pressure to leave their office and go file through the chain. They can't do that. They can say it, they can sound like it, because again, they're human beings, right? And human beings make errors. But at the end of the day, they have to take that complaint if you insist on filing with them. Also, if you go in there and talk, they're not going to write it out for you. And if they do, they're going to write it in the way that they understand it best. If you go in there saying that you're not sure, but you've already shot yourself in the foot. Your best bet is to show up with that written document. If you have any questions, you need to show up. You can do that, but have that written document, and to make your attachments to any references that you make your attachments to any evidence you want to put in there. Don't make it any difficult for the IG. Make it as easy as possible for them to do the right thing in your eyes. Okay. Let the subject slow leak the process and let them gather their stuff if necessary. Again, the DoD especially, they have a tight timeline and they have to turn that case. And if not, they're put under a lot of pressure to turn that case quickly in a timely manner. They have to report quite often. Sometimes, if it's really old, they might have to report daily, giving some level of status. A weekly is not uncommon. Anyways, the complaint itself have all your stuff attached to it. Again, knowing that there's that timeline, are they going to reach out to you to get this information? And if so, are you going to be able to find it and get it back to them? Have it to them ahead of time. Anticipate those questions, especially on your references. If you've got any people saying X or Y or Z, make a memo for record and include that in there. You can date it and sign it. They don't need to sign it. They don't need to have it notarized. You can do that. It would not be a bad thing, but the requirements are just that information that you have. You're allowed to have an opinion, and that's the time and the place to have that opinion. Anyways, we've covered generally speaking what it takes to file a complaint and those little tidbits that might make your complaint a little bit more streamlined. We're going to cover this a lot deeper in follow-on blogs, but by all means, keep in mind that there are references to choose. For example, AFR 90, AR, Army Regulation 20-1, 20-1, and Air Force Instruction, AFI 90-301, 90-301. Those are references when it comes to the IG process. And it's something to keep in mind because they're going to talk about the timeliness. They're going to talk about the complaint in and of itself. So by all means, check those out, file your complaint, and listen in for more information because we're going to cover this even in more detail.